Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have with me Todd Moore from Thales. So Todd, if you want to kind of share a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Tony. Well, thanks for the invite. I'm responsible for our data security products here at Thales. I've been in this position through multiple acquisitions for over 15 years now, and we've grown our portfolio quite a bit into a very broad data security platform. I'm based in the Baltimore, Washington area, and I love everything cybersecurity. So glad to be here, Tony, and looking forward to catching up with you today.
Well, mind blown. Let's start with, for years, I always thought it was Thales.
You and a lot of people. So let's just call it out. So that's one of the things that's very interesting. If you look at it from an English speaker point of view, you would say Thales, right? But the company is Thales. It's based around a Greek philosopher, that name. And Thales is really well known in Europe because of its based in Paris, and we have two sides of our business. It's a big conglomerate. One side is defense-based. So I think in Europe, a lot of people know Thales because of the defense side. We build, parts for airplanes, and we do satellites and ships and all that fun stuff. And as we've built out the cybersecurity business, Thales has actually done, over the last 9 years, about 8 billion euros of acquisitions, building out cybersecurity practice, and we're working on building out our brand in that space. But yeah, we have some work to do, Tony. So I'm glad you called that out, and like to educate others that it's Thales is how you call the company.
All right. Well,
thank you for that.
Today years old when I learned that. So that's my first takeaway.
Cool.
So I wanted to have you on. I wanted to talk about the 2025 Data Threat Report, which you guys just released recently. Let's just start with, I guess your general thoughts, like your general thoughts about the report overall, but anything that kind of stood out to you in terms of, a result or a statistic that you didn't expect.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess about the report itself. Let me start there. I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years now, and over 3,000 participants in the survey, a bunch of different IT security, and there's a whole bunch of surveys out there, and we really wanted to focus on data and data threat. So I'm proud of what the report has become over those last 5 years, because now we have this huge knowledge base where we can actually compare and start looking at trends. It's not just comparing 1 year over next year, 2 years. We have 5 years of data now, so it's starting to be able to show some trends, and I'm really excited about that. I guess to answer your question about what surprised me, I guess a couple of things, right? Some surprising and some not surprising. I guess not surprising, AI is getting adopted everywhere. Artificial intelligence, people are talking about that, and it's happening at such a accelerated rate that people are actually skipping steps to get to the benefits of AI, and they're missing some of the steps around security. And that's not surprising in the sense that cloud had the same problem. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, whenever public cloud first came out, everybody was clamoring to get to cloud, right? And they forgot about securing the information when they got there. So that's something that came out of the report. One surprising metric, I guess I would say, on the surprising side, is that we are seeing the number of breaches identified by companies going down. There was a decrease this year, year over year, in the number of breaches, new breaches that folks are actually admitting to or putting out there through the survey. And I think we saw a correlation last year that the number of breaches in companies that are regulated companies that have passed a compliance audit, they're starting to see a trend downward. And we saw that trend continue even further downward this year. So there's no correlation between going through a compliance audit, checking the boxes with an auditor or a regulator that you're going to, not be breached. But we are seeing that it's forcing folks to put the best security practices in place from those different regulations, and those regulations firm up, that it's helping them protect against some of these attacks that continue to come at them every day. So that's just two items I would highlight. And then, of course, post-quantum. We can get into that a little bit later, Tony, but that was also an interesting finding coming out of the report.
Okay. No, so let's start with, I agree with you. I think, anyone who's been around long enough, you always see that it's the same trend for everything that kind of goes viral and catches on mainstream, whether it's the cloud or you can go back to when Wi-Fi first became a thing or whatever. It's like there's the initial sort of gold rush land grab of feeling like if you're a company that was not on the bleeding edge, and then you kind of see this uptick and you see everyone jumping on this bandwagon, then you scramble to just get on the bandwagon because you're like, all right, well, now I recognize that AI is a competitive advantage. I recognize that AI can streamline, blah, blah, blah. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be at a disadvantage in the market. So I'm going to just jump on board.
Mhm.
And that is, whether it's the cloud or AI, that part of the equation is done without regard for security. That part is literally a knee-jerk reaction to the mainstream trend and just not wanting to get left behind. So it's like, hey, let's jump on the bandwagon. We'll figure out where the brakes are later.
Yep, you got it. And the survey, the Data Threat Report, just confirmed all that every large company or small company sees this motion, this momentum happening. They just want to get their toes in the water, and the budgets are being made available to folks to try, to really experiment. And now the security team, and this came through in the report, are now stepping up and saying, wait a minute, slow down here just a little bit. All this data that's being used to, drive these models, that's being used to ask questions and what we're doing, it's not being protected, and no one's really watching for data leakage as one example, right? I mean, what data is being leaked out of our organization, into these models and into these systems. And so, and the big buzzword out there is agentic AI, right? As agentic AI starts being created and more agents are being developed, and it's all around the data. And so we are seeing, and we saw it in the Data Threat Report, a lot of conversation around the integrity of data. Not so much about the confidentiality, but really understanding, where did the data come from, and make sure that data is a trusted data source. So I think the security folks are starting to wake up now, and there will be some catch up, and I guess that's good for us in the security industry, but it's also bad, right? Because the horse has left the barn, if you can use that metaphor, at this point in time, in some cases.
And over the last 2 years, I've had there's been a shift in the conversations I have with vendors of going from, well, first of all, and I say this on pretty much every episode of the podcast, cybersecurity was already on the AI bandwagon before generative AI. I mean, AI ML has been what we were talking about going back a decade plus. Mm-hmm. But just in the last couple of years, as ChatGPT came out, generative AI became a thing, and everyone got on that, there's been this transition of the conversation from all of the magical things it can do for you to, oh wait, it can also do magical things for the bad guys. So then it became, okay, well now I want to use AI to proactively streamline, be productive, et cetera, et cetera. I also need to use AI to defend better against threat actors who are using AI. And then now we've evolved to the third stage, which is kind of more what you're talking about, which is I also need to proactively defend the AI itself. Whether it's from prompt injection, whether it's data poisoning. I need to make sure that the AI itself is safe as well. So there's multiple facets of security to AI, depending on which angle you're looking at it from. But yeah, I mean, it does come down. It very much comes down to the data, because all of the decisions, everything it's trained on, is a function of the data. One thing, and actually, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on this. So when I've seen all the stories. I've seen companies block access to generative AI, and I'm not saying it's not for a valid reason. I get it. If I take Thales financial results from the quarter and I upload them into ChatGPT to ask a question, that information is now part of the ether. It's now part of the LLM. And I get on one level that is a problem, but I also feel like it reminds me a little bit, and I'm gonna digress a little. It reminds me of when Apple first came out with Touch ID.
Okay.
And so you get these iPhones, they come out, and now we can unlock them with our fingerprints. And immediately there were security researchers who were like trying to prove that this is not a good security solution. It can be broken. And they succeeded. Like they were able to, lift someone's fingerprint off their coffee cup, create like some sort of Mission Impossible 3D printed fingerprint, and access, and they proved that it technically could be done. And that was the headline. The headline was, this can be broken.
Right.
But my takeaway was, okay, but I'm not being targeted by Ethan Hunt and Mission Impossible. Like what you proved to me is that yes, it's technically possible to break this, but I don't need to worry about it because nobody's going through that effort to get into my iPhone. And that's the thought process I had about this data leakage thing when it comes to like the LLMs. I'm like, okay, if I take the Thales financial report and I upload it, yes, it's now part of the general data pool. Does that mean that the data has been exposed to the general public? I'm like, I don't know. Like, who is sifting through the entire LLM to go find that information?
Right. Well, no, I think you're right. If you want to find vulnerabilities and ways to break things, you will, right? With enough focus, and you're right. The headline will come out around that one bit that gets exposed. I think what a lot of the CISOs I'm talking to, and a lot of the just IT security folks that I talk to, and the survey brought it out, is that everybody again wants to use it, but they don't know how to use it in a uniform way. So there is, I'm kind of going tangential as well. That there is a regulatory piece of this. We talked about compliance, one of the findings of the report and how it's being used, but there's still some work that needs to be done, globally around how folks implement AI in such a way that gives you those best security practices, right? That they're still evolving. Or what does that mean? But I think to your point, and what you're suggesting is in everyday's life, we want to use it. Our engineers at Thales are using AI to help generate code and to test code. And there's so much benefits that the benefits outweigh the risks in some cases. But like any risk profile or risk system, and when we're talking about that, it really is how much risk can the company take? What guardrails do you put in place to really prevent something, extremely bad from happening? And because AI in general, a lot of the models are non-deterministic, they give you a different answer. Different ways. That's the way they're built. You got to really have the guardrails. You got to have the flexibility. And if it's something really, really critical to you, we would suggest from a Thales best security practice that that goes nowhere near maybe an AI model. If you're talking about the Thales financial report that has to, before it hits the networks as a public information, that needs to be treated like a very sensitive piece of data. It needs to be classified appropriately, and you need to put a control around it, which could be part of your guardrail, your policy, whatever you want to call it, and make sure that never finds its way into any type of AI system. So I think that we're going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time, and I think it's companies coming up with their own internal policies to be consistent, but it's also the industry and governments can help too, coming up with regulations to help us be more consistent in how we use these tools going forward. Does that make sense, Tony?
It does. It does for sure. When you're talking about that at the end, I was going to say, yeah. So like any conversation that you think is classified enough that you wouldn't want to have it in a group chat on Signal, maybe don't upload that to an LLM. But I was also going to say that I know that ChatGPT, I know OpenAI offers a version for enterprises where you basically take the entire, LLM, the entire, generative AI, but run it internally. So and I think that might be a bridge for a lot of organizations is to say, listen, we know you want to use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is great for a lot of things, but I don't want you uploading our data to this, general public data pool. But if I've got my own ChatGPT internally, well, now you can do whatever you want because that data, that's our data, and and we're the only ones who are going to see it.
Oh yeah, and that's being employed by a lot of companies. They have their own version of the model running just for their proprietary instances. I think you're alluding to that earlier as well. But keeping employees only using that version of the model and not going back to the open source, OpenAI or ChatGPT, that's still a problem that every organization has, right? You can't. I think that's the problem that folks are seeing is that even though you give the appropriate way to use AI, we talk about shadow IT and engineers and all of us find ways to work around maybe some of the controls that are in place. It's just keeping your eyes on that. It's keeping visibility. I think that's one important element. We're getting way away from the data threat report, but the one important element of any organization is visibility of what's happening within your organization. And there's a new buzzword in the industry around security posture management and data security posture management. If you haven't heard that, Tony, that phrase, it's really about giving organizations visibility about where data is popping up, where it's ending up going, and giving organizations a little bit more just idea of who's creating data, why they're creating, where is it coming from, and then based on that, you can put the right, again, the right controls, the right mechanisms in place to stop it. So you have an engineer or you have an employee. I don't want to pick on engineers. You can pick on product managers like myself or managers. If I'm consistently using something outside of what the company has said is the way you're supposed to use a model, an AI model, then there's something I'm going to have to do, whether that's through an HR, behavioral, other type of mechanisms to prevent that person from working outside the controls.
Right. I think, when it comes to shadow IT, shadow AI, the organization, the IT department, whatever, they will do whatever they can. I think, I've worked on that side of things. It's like when you find out that your employees are using Dropbox, instead of just blocking it, you have to first kind of step back and understand, okay, why are you using this? What is the use case for this tool? Then you can do a security assessment of the tool and decide, well, is Dropbox the way we want to solve this, or do we want to use Box? Do we want to use OneDrive? We recognize the problem, we want to solve it, but we want you to use this tool instead. I think that in an 80-20 rule sort of way, I think that addresses most of the problem. Like if you just say, okay, look, here's our policy. We're going to give you a tool that does this. We'd like you to use this tool. And for most people, the vast majority of people, that will work and that will be fine. But just like your cybersecurity posture will block, eliminate, prevent 90% of the threats or whatever, but we always say that there's no such thing as impenetrable defense. If I really want to get in, I'll find a way in. And the same thing is true with shadow IT and shadow AI. It's like you can have the policy, you can have the sanction tools, but if an employee really wants to go around you, there is a way. There's always a way around.
Yeah, it's a Touch ID problem. The Apple Touch ID example.
Right.
There's always a way to.
Right. Well, someone who wants to bad enough will find a way, but it becomes. But yeah, like the Touch ID thing though, it becomes yes, it can be done, but practically speaking, it won't be done.
Unless you're a state actor and have all the resources. But coming back to the data threat report though, I think that what we've just been talking about though. A lot of AI talk happening. The report did say, Tony, that the second biggest budget that companies are spending on next to cloud security, the second biggest security budget item that folks are spending on, they're still spending all of their money, most of the money on cloud security. So not everyone has solved the cloud security problem just yet, putting everything in place to make sure data is secure when it goes to clouds. The second biggest one was AI security. So definitely a lot of interest to get caught up on AI and to really get the protections in place. So that was some good information. I don't think it's overly surprising, but it's clear that that's what's happening out there, and it's a good confirmation in the report of what's happening in the industry. Yeah.
One of the things that's on the report, and once upon a time I worked for a DLP company. So I thought it was interesting. It was said like roughly a third of organizations say that they can fully classify their data, and I want to say it was 16% said they either don't have any classification at all or very little or whatever. That has been a challenge. I mean, when I worked for a DLP company, it was back in 2007-8. So the problem has existed forever, and I think whether we're talking about security or even just data, like efficient data management, that has always been a challenge. Is making sure that data is properly classified, and in a lot of cases, I think the challenge comes down to who gets to decide what its classification is. If you're relying on the data, the content creator to manually assign a classification level, that's flawed from the beginning. And also, if you allow for manual classification of data, also provides a weakness that can be circumvented, because now if I want to exfiltrate the data, if I'm an insider threat and I want to exfiltrate sensitive data, and you give me the power to decide what its classification level is, I can just go, oh, this is fine, it's not classified at all. So I'm curious your thoughts on like how to solve this, and what role AI can or should play in trying to sort of automate the process of being able to look at data and determine how classified is this information.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a great question. I was in the report. About 2/3 of the respondents say they have 50% of their data classified today, and they're using 5 different data classification tools on average. And so that was some of the metrics you can get out of the report. And no surprise there that not everybody has all their data classified. My God, it like you said, Tony, there's just so much data being created, and AI is part of that problem, right? I mean, artificial intelligence is the biggest creator of data today. I think I saw a metric that, not in our report, but I saw an industry metric that over 90% of all new unstructured data, files, videos, chats, Word documents are coming from artificial intelligence. So you got all this data popping up all over the place being created, and organizations have a really hard time getting their arms around that. And by using 5 different tools to classify data, then they have inconsistency between those tools, and that was the part that came out of the report. But I'm with you. You're not going to be able to classify all your data. It's something that I think organizations recognize. There's just so much data that needs to be classified. AI is helping in this, because you're no longer using regex, these matching algorithms. Just matching, is this something that might be important to the company. Now we're using machine learning and artificial intelligence to look at contextual. That looks like it's something that Tony wrote, and it's next to his bank account, and it's next to a payment to a credit card. It could be important information, or maybe it's a house number. So there's always contextual algorithms that have come out where AI and machine learning is really helping get the classification automatically even better. But a lot of times, when you classify at the highest level, it does require some filtering to make sure that there hasn't been a mistake made. I guess to answer your question and to give more specifically, is that's the problem. We know the problem exists. You got to continue to try to, bite at it, take some minor bites at the problem, and try to, get as far as you can to classify your most sensitive data. So I think what we, from a best practice, from a security company, will tell our customers is we recognize it's a huge problem, but at least do a network survey, understand what databases have the most critical information, what file systems have the most critical information, what cloud storage may have the most critical information, and focus there. And then in terms of the classification engine alone, don't trust the classification engine alone. You do need some sort of monitoring. Now, DLP is one way to do that, as you mentioned, but DLP kind of happens after the fact when somebody, finds this critical information and starts exfiltrating it. I think you need to be a little bit more shift left, I like to say, as an industry, buzzword, where you've got the monitoring with behavioral metrics. You're looking at posture. You're looking at all these security aspects, and you're essentially looking for areas within your systems, the most critical areas that are being impacted first, and you're highlighting those. You're giving them a higher risk score, and you're telling the CISO what they need to do to go fix the problem, where they need to focus their energy first. So I hope that all makes sense. I mean, it's kind of high level, but that's kind of what the data is pulling out, that classification is hard, like you just said very well. It's not perfect, but you got to have defense in depth, another term that people like to use. You have multiple systems. You just can't classify. You also have to have the monitoring piece on top of it as well, too. So,
yeah. Well, going to the sort of the threat actor side of things, and this kind of comes back to the same sort of thing of like, well, not everyone's going to do this. Most threat actors aren't going to put in the time and effort to do something like this. But the first time I saw someone demonstrate for me the use of graph analysis from a proactive side to be able to say, okay, look, here's the whole environment, here's how the dots connect, and if you change this policy, here's all the downflow, things that are affected. I thought, wow, that's magic. That's a phenomenal tool to have. And I thought, but I can also flip that around. If I'm the attacker and I can create some sort of a graph analysis, I can also use that to find the holes. And one of the things related to what we were just talking about is I assume there are threat actors out there who are starting to do this, where you're like, you just dump everything into an LLM, into a generative AI model of some sort, where you're like, well, I've got this data from over here and I've got that data from over there. I can also just run some sort of a query that goes out and says, okay, here's a list of all the employees we know from Thales. Go out and search Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, find me everything you can about these people, and just build a database and connect dots, so that a piece of data that you have as a threat actor that maybe seems meaningless, or maybe it has no value by itself, but when you start putting all these other pieces on the table, then you go, okay, well, now I can connect dots.
Yep.
And now it means something.
Yep. And that's the power of AI, right? It's going to find connections that we never were going to see on our own human or legacy systems. It's going to do it much faster. It's amazing, when you think about it from an access perspective. We change jobs, right? We change companies. Sometimes those credentials get lost, keys get lost to encrypted material, and AI is going to find those connections. They're going to remember those connections, and they're going to find things that we had access to 10 years ago that we probably shouldn't have access to today, that our credentials will still work. So there's a bunch of security implications that you just mentioned that are going to come to fruition. And so again, just the classification itself is one element that we need to understand where the critical data is, but we have to have another way to actually monitor and give visibility to what's happening on a day-to-day. And if an actor or an AI system makes those correlations, just like you said, and we're able to flag that, that's going to give a lot more valuable insight into a CISO to be able to protect their systems, because they'll see something's happening, it doesn't feel right, and those are the insights that we need. Well, go ahead, Tony.
Well, I was gonna go back to something you alluded to at the beginning, which is the PQC piece. We just had Quantum Day. I know there's I've been talking with companies for a year or two now about this upcoming quantum problem, and so you've got this whole concept of harvest now, decrypt later. Basically all of the data breaches that have happened to date. There are threat actors out there who are sitting on data that is currently in an encrypted form that they can't really do anything with yet. But
Correct.
When we get there, all of a sudden they're going to be able to go back in time and say, okay, well, now let me go let me go decrypt all of this data that I have and see what I've got. Just real quick additional side note, I talked to the company at the end of last year. We were talking about NIST, and NIST came out with their kind of guidelines around post-quantum cryptography protocols.
Yep.
And the vendor I was talking to pointed out, they said, well, at this point, the quantum computing aspect of it almost becomes irrelevant. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't, but from an organizational perspective, from a compliance perspective, NIST already drew a line in the sand. So it's like, well, now we have to comply with what NIST said. Within reason. But NIST has set the bar already, and so we're already going to do this, whether or not quantum computing ever happens down the road.
No, you're right. I mean, we finally got some guidance from the industry around quantum, and there is, well, a couple things there. Let's talk about NIST first. So the first tranche of algorithms came out from NIST last September, and a lot of vendors have started implementing those algorithms, including Thales, in our products. The crypto agility, those algorithms are going to change. The fact that NIST released them allows people like the bad guys and good guys to test against those algorithms and try to break them. And there will be some algorithms that will need to be modified or changed over time, and that's okay. I mean, as long as vendors can keep up with all those changes, we'll be in good shape. In terms of the timeline that you mentioned, NIST has said in 2030, we're going to start replacing the traditional algorithms, asymmetric cryptography, with these new post-quantum resistant algorithms. And by 2035, they're going to be deprecated. They're not going to be used anymore. And geez, that's only 10 years away. But Australia came out. I don't know if you knew this, Tony. I'm sure you did. That Australia government actually came out and said by 2030, they want to deprecate the asymmetric algorithms. So they're actually at a faster time frame than the US NIST, which means if you want to do business with Australia in a secure fashion, you're going to have to implement these algorithms even faster, perhaps. So we are starting to see momentum there. The Data Threat Report did pull that out. It basically said that the number one threat folks are worried about is harvest-now-decrypt-later and the future existence of the algorithms being deprecated. And so we're just talking about classification and visibility and knowing where your data is. There is a huge amount of effort happening, and it came out of the report itself, that 3 out of 5 organizations have now started investing in understanding what's going to be impacted if a post-quantum computer pops up tomorrow. So let's say a powerful post-quantum event happens, Q-Day, people like to call it, shows up tomorrow. What in my organization is going to be impacted first? And at Thales, we're seeing a lot of banks, finance, governments, a lot of regulatory industries like healthcare as well, starting to really do the identification, knowing what in their systems can be impacted first. They're starting to prepare by testing post-quantum resistant systems, mostly in test environments. They haven't moved into production just yet, but we're seeing things start to move into production. And we work a lot with Google Cloud in particular. And Google, along with Amazon and Azure as well, they've all announced it, but Google announced at the Google Next a few weeks ago how they're giving post-quantum resistant cryptography or algorithms as an option for like Google Workspace, or when you use encryption within some of the Google environments. So people are starting to take this pretty seriously. They're getting their heads around it, and yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens if this really comes to bear within our lifetimes. I hope so. I hope I'm around 5-10 years from now, but who knows, Tony? We still don't know. I mean, the industry experts will say at RSA, I don't know if you attend RSA conference, but that's one of the big security conferences here in the U.S. The word on the street, it could be anywhere between 2 to 13 years. We see a post-quantum computer attack, but maybe it's sooner than that. And the last thing I'll just say on the matter is when we work with some of the finance and government customers we work with, there's regulations out there that want you to hold data for up to 30 years. And imagine if you have to hold data for 30 years, some of that data could be under attack, 10, 15 years from now. So it is important that people start thinking about it at this point in time.
Right. Well, and when it comes to the concept of harvest now, decrypt later,
mm-hmm.
I talked to someone a few months back who pushed back on my theory on this, because they said that in their opinion, threat actors don't have the attention span or infrastructure to just sit on data indefinitely. Like it either has value or it doesn't, and they move on. And I said, well, maybe, but there have been millions and millions and millions of data records breached over time. Billions, and I assume somebody out there is sitting on some data, and even if I adopt quantum algorithms now, and I change my encryption to PQC algorithms now, it's not going to save me from the data that's already been breached being decrypted.
Yep, no, you're right. I mean, the problem already has happened for some. I think you're right. I mean, I'll push back to a little bit. I mean, geez, probably 95%, maybe it's 98% of the data that's out there today won't have value 10 years from now.
I agree with that.
It's a needle in the haystack. It's going to take someone with some resources. I don't know the cost of storage these days, or what that would mean to harvest that and store it away for that period of time. Someone has to pay to inventory that. I mean, there's electric that needs to be applied, I assume, somewhere. I mean, there's some cost to holding that data away. but if I was a state actor or a malicious person working in an appropriate area, I got to believe that there's some percentage of data out there that is being harvested away today
Right.
in input. But for you and me in our day-to-day lives, and for most companies, I mean, our payment credit card transactions are so transactional. I mean, the data is probably as good as until I get a new credit card, perhaps. I mean, or where I'm living, my personal information might be important throughout my lifetime, or maybe again from a residence I live in today. I don't know.
That's kind of more the stuff that like from a business perspective. I think a lot of business data is more ephemeral. Is more like it has value today. It might not have value in 5 years, or it'll already be public knowledge and nobody will care or whatever. So it's like that's not part of as much what I'm worried about as, say, like the OMB breach, or breaches where it's like, okay, well, you've got like everyone's social security numbers. It's like, well, my social security number is my social security number. It's not changing. And so like now, on the one hand, I will say that that's not a real concern of mine, in that I already assume that my social security number is attached to my name and exists on the dark web today. So like I don't hold any illusion that that's some secret information that's going to get decrypted later. But that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, though. That there is information that basically doesn't change. Whether it's like a driver's license number, for a lot of people, a home address, and when that information is able to be decrypted, I mean, some of it might lead directly to problems, but more than that, I think it just becomes fodder for what I was talking about earlier, with my ability as a threat actor to create a graph data analysis situation where it just fills in some blanks on my connect the dots, where I was like, okay, well, now I can put this social security number with Todd's name, and I can put this home address with Todd's name, and and that helps me build things out. We'll see. I mean, I agree. It does come back to the same thing as like we've talked about with the Touch ID of like, yes, it's technically possible. Is it a realistic concern for an average individual or an average company? Probably not. I mean, it probably is more of a nation-state espionage level concern.
Yeah, but it's out there, and it is a concern. I think more concerning for boards and CEOs are the fact that there is regulations coming, that algorithms will be deprecated 10 years from now per NIST or faster in other parts of the world. And if something miraculously pops up in 3 years or 2 years, what's going to impact my company, put my company at risk. So the good news is companies are getting on board. Again, I think the report said 3 out of 5 are actively doing things, which is probably lower than it needs to be. It probably needs to be 5 out of 5 are doing something, but we are seeing momentum in that area, right. And it's definitely becoming a point of conversation.
Hopefully organizations learned something from like the scramble around Y2K. It's like we knew for 20 years before the year 2000 that was going to be a problem, that day was coming, and yet so many organizations waited until the middle of 1999 to go, shit, we better go do something and fix this, and then there was this mad dash to like patch everything and update everything before Y2K hit, and it's like, okay, well, now we have a situation where we don't know exactly what day Q day will be. We know it's coming though, and and now NIST in Australia, there are guidelines being put out there. So like, by all means, get started. Like, start now. Don't wait until you see the headline that says, "Oh, we just crossed this milestone and Q day is going to be in 3 months."
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the message that we like to send, and to everyone that's listening, and to you, Tony, you can talk to is, get started now. It doesn't hurt to get started now, and I definitely agree with that. So it's funny when you say people knew Y2K was coming and they didn't do anything about it. I still meet a lot of people in my day-to-day job that at a highest level in organizations, I call it the ostrich effect, right? They want to put their head in the sand in some aspects. What they don't know, they don't have to solve. And maybe you've seen that with other people you've talked to. If I'm a CISO or a CIO or even a CEO. If I don't know about a problem, then I don't have to worry about solving it. And I do feel like that is something that has gotten better over time. The Data Threat Report shows that. But there are still organizations out there that feel that it's not going to impact me. I got other important things to fish to fry than to worry about this. So it's something we fight against every day in the security industry is really not trying to be Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but really trying to show that, hey, there's some things you should be doing, multi-factor authentication, know where your critical data is, use encryption when it makes sense, just basic things you should be doing versus just ignoring it and hope that nothing bad happens. So.
Well, not to drag you into the political quagmire, but as you were talking, I was like, yeah, that reminds me of when COVID hit and the response from the administration at the time was, we need to stop testing people for COVID. Then it's like, that doesn't make it go away. That just means you don't know about it anymore. Or even, when it comes to like the CDC, like, we've got regulations in place that ban the CDC from like tracking, monitoring and tracking deaths from firearms. And it's like, okay, but that would be valid information to have. Like, it would be useful for us to analyze this information. And you think that because you're not collecting the data and analyzing it, that the problem doesn't exist. And that's not the way the world works.
Yeah. Well, I won't be able to comment on those types of things.
Yeah, I didn't expect you to.
Yeah.
But one other thing I was going to say about the post-quantum cryptography and in general is, on some level, the whole concept isn't new to me. I've said for years, and so far it hasn't become an issue really. But like, even if we're just talking about like document formats, image formats, video formats, those things change over time. You've got GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs, and like you used to have Word star files, or other applications that you would create documents in. And I don't know, it was probably 15 years ago, or maybe more, that I had this thought of, okay, well, I have all this data that I've stored from whenever, way back when, that's just sitting on a hard drive somewhere in my house, that if I were to open it today, I'm not sure I could actually access any of that data, because things change over time. And like I said, for the most part, that hasn't proven to be true yet, because most image programs and like Microsoft Word already has built in like all the backwards protocols. Like, you can open pretty much any file, it'll figure it out. But it still occurred to me like that there could come a time where you go to open something and you're like, oh, I have all of my family photos in the world are saved in this JPEG format. And then 30 years from now, like when my grandparents died, it was real easy. I walked into the house, I grabbed the photo album off the shelf, and there it is. These are the family photos. 30 years from now, if I die, my kids have to go back through all of my Apple photos and try to figure out what's what. And it's like, that's a whole different thing. And along those lines, though, it also occurred to me from an encryption perspective, that I might encrypt my backup data, and what I encrypt it with today, or say 10 years ago, might be adequate encryption in the moment. But I wondered how many organizations, archived data, like they have, whatever, hard drives or tape backups or whatever, that are stored in a basement somewhere, that were encrypted with an encryption algorithm that seemed top of the line 15 years ago, but that would be sort of trivial to crack now.
Yeah, I mean, if you have data encrypted away, and we've seen this happen when AES came out, DES, DES encryption, triple DES, AES. I mean, there's been deprecation of other algorithms over time, and people use those algorithms. And if the risk is if you lose the key, right? So if you take your archive and you store it away in your basement of all your photo albums, and now you're not there to have a key to unlock it, this actually could be a positive thing, right? You now have a way to actually get those photos back in that sense, because you can unlock it without actually having the key. So you're bringing up a whole nother topic about key management. Encryption is a great tool to use, and everybody should use encryption. But managing those keys are so important, right? So that you have the the ability to manage them over time. You got to rotate them. You've got to do all the right life cycle management so that you make sure that whenever you're not available, or your descendants aren't available, that key still lives on, so it can do that decryption. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to bring a parallel to like a DES, something that was encrypted back in 1980, and now all of a sudden I don't have that key anymore for whatever reason. I didn't do good key lifecycle management. I now have tools out there to help me get back that data from a DES perspective. So I guess there's you're leading me down a path of maybe there's a positive aspect. I'd say use encryption and manage the keys well, but if you don't, it's just the way the world works, right? New innovation, new algorithms will be built, new mechanisms to break those algorithms will be developed, and so I think it's an evolution of how folks have protected and been able to access data over time. Sorry, that's not a great answer, Tony.
No, I mean, I've never really gotten into cryptocurrency, but I know that there have been situations where someone has like lost the key, and it's like doesn't matter how many bitcoins you've got, like if you don't have the key, they don't exist.
There's movies about that. I think there's movies and television shows about that. Yeah,
and
real life examples.
But listening to you just now, it's like, all right, well, there's an argument to be said for, okay, I know there are bitcoins in here. I'm going to hang on to this until I figure out how to crack it.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's a monetary value there for someone, for sure. Yeah. So
all right. Well,
all right.
I want to kind of wrap things up, but I'll leave the floor to you to just kind of share any sort of parting thoughts on the data threat report, or what organizations where should they go to view the report, or what should they do?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Again, thanks for the invite to be here. Data threat report contains a wealth of information. It's quantified, so it's something that you can go take a look at. There's some summaries. The threat report you can find on our website, thalesgroup.com. Just go up there and do a search for the Thales Data Threat Report. Or go to your favorite browser search engine and do the same thing. I think you're going to find a lot of wonderful things that we've already talked about, Tony, around artificial intelligence, around post-quantum, just around data in general, right? Protection data. We didn't even get into, the number one threats that people are seeing from an attack perspective, whether that's phishing versus ransomware, and straight out hacking attempts. So there's good information in there as well, too. The report's not horribly long. So I think you can get through it in 15, 20 minutes, definitely less than a half an hour. So get your favorite beverage, cup of coffee, and take a look at it, and love to hear your feedback. So we're excited about it, and we're going to do another 5 years. I hope another 15 years of this report, Tony. We just finished our first 5.
All right, sounds good. Well, when I publish the podcast, I will also share links to those things. But cool. I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me.
It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed, or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.